We've all been there. We're driving down the road, maybe a little bit in a hurry, and maybe we're driving just a tad bit too fast. Suddenly, there's lights behind us, there's sirens going off, and now we know we're being pulled over. Let's say you pull over on the side of the road, and now the officer walks up to your car, taps on your window, and says, "Hey, I need to see any guns that you have in your car." Do you have to comply? Do you have to tell him you have a gun? What if you have a concealed carry permit? Do you know if your permit is in a must notify state or in a state that only requires you to disclose if the officer asks? These are the questions we're going to answer today. In fact, I'm going to give you exactly what you should think about doing if you have a concealed carry permit license in a state that is a must notify state, or maybe you're in a state that is only requiring you to notify if the officer asks. I will also explain to you how you should be careful and what to do when it comes to notifying the officer that you do have a gun in the car. And if you don't have a permit at all, I'll let you know whether or not you should disclose to the officer whether you have a gun on your vehicle. I'll also explain how to handle a police officer when it comes to reporting that you do have a gun in the car so that you don't create a dangerous or tense situation. Finally, if you don't have a concealed carry permit license, I'm also going to explain what you should be thinking about if an officer walks up and asks if you have any guns in the car and whether or not your constitutional rights protect you from having to tell him anything at all. First, let's start with one of the most obvious things that you need to be aware of, and that is whether or not you should pull over if a police officer lights you up, turns on those lights and turns on that siren. I have some people come to me and start talking about the whole sovereign citizen argument and that the officer has no jurisdiction to pull you over, you've done nothing wrong, so as a result of that, you don't have to submit to the officer when he lights you up. Can I tell you right now, always pull over if a police officer turns on his siren and lights. If you don't, the officer is going to now treat this as an evading arrest with a vehicle, which is a felony crime. And I can tell you what, I've seen the cops get the Air One chopper out. I've seen them get back up. And now all of a sudden, this is going to get very dangerous very quickly. Now, once you're pulled over and the officer starts to walk up to you, it's always a good idea to keep your hands on the steering wheel. Why? Because you don't know what kind of police officer you're dealing with. You could be dealing with a rookie officer who has maybe not dealt with many traffic stops before, and he might get a little nervous. And if you keep your hands in view for the officer and you make sure and you speak calm and collected, you don't give the officer any reason to escalate the situation. Because for all you know, the officer may have already formed an opinion about you, and you want to make sure this doesn't get dangerous on you during a traffic stop. When the officer approaches you, it's important to remember to keep your hands on the steering wheel and let the officer do the talking. You don't need to be responding. In other words, what I mean by this, if the officer starts asking you questions like, "Hey man, where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Did you just pull out of that bar?" Or, "Hey, do you know how fast you were driving?" You are not required to answer all of the police officer's questions. You can always be polite and courteous, but you are not required to answer questions where the police officer is fishing for more information. Now, even though you don't have to answer all of the police officer's questions, you do have to give him a copy of your driver's license and your insurance. Many times the officer is going to run your proof of registration back in his patrol car when he checks it on the computer. But those are the three things we really have to make sure and provide to the officer. Why do you really have to show him all these things? I know I have lots of people in the comments on some of my videos say, "Why do I have to actually show him anything?" The reality of it is, in every state in the country, in order for you to legally operate a motor vehicle, you are required to have a valid driver's license and you are required to have proof of insurance in order to operate that vehicle, including, of course, having valid registration. As a result, the cops can ask you to give proof of this information when they come to your door. Otherwise, after you've provided this information to the officer, keep your mouth closed and let him write that speeding ticket to you so that you can be on your way. Why do I say not to volunteer a bunch of information to the police officer? It's plain and simple. Everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Everything you say will be used by the police officer to establish probable cause, either to give you a citation or to arrest you and take you to jail. Look, it's not going to benefit you to try to talk your way out of either the ticket or being arrested. The reality of it is the things that you say, including your body language, can be misconstrued, they can be misinterpreted or misapplied, and now you can find yourself in much deeper trouble. To be clear, this is not me trying to be anti-police. This is me trying to be pro-constitutional rights, because I want you to understand, if you are in the United States of America, you have certain constitutional rights, but they only work for you if you stand on those rights and exercise those rights. But what if the officer starts being aggressive with you? Whatever you do, do not match his aggression with more aggression. It will only get worse. In fact, if you start making quick movements or you start arguing with him and turning and jerking, the officer is going to say you are making furtive movements, and now he is afraid that his officer's safety is at risk, and he's going to be yanking you out of the car, and you could end up facing much more serious charges. Remain calm, exercise your right to remain silent, and keep those hands on the steering wheel. Now, let's say he comes up to you and everything's going fine, and he starts asking you, do you have any weapons in the car? We're going to break this down now based upon whether you have a concealed permit or whether you do not have a concealed permit. What about concealed permit holders? Do you have to tell the officer you have a gun in your car? It really comes down to the state you're in. This is really important to know your state's law because officers will many times respond very differently to learning that you have a gun on your person or in the car. There are currently 12 states, along with the District of Columbia, that require you to immediately notify that police officer that you're carrying a gun in your car if he pulls you over. On the other hand, there are 14 states that require you only to notify the police officer you have a gun on you if he asks you. So let's break this down by the must notify states first. If you're in Alaska, Arkansas, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, Louisiana, Michigan, Nebraska, North Carolina, Ohio, South Carolina, and Texas, when you get pulled over, if you've got that concealed carry license, you must notify the officer that you have the gun. Now, there are some other states that have some nuances, like California. There is no state law that requires it, but there are a number of counties in California that require you to notify, a must notify requirement on having a permit in that county. Additionally, in Maine, you are required to notify if carrying without a permit, however, not if you are carrying with a permit. And in North Dakota, if a North Dakota resident constitutionally is carrying without a permit, you should still notify the officer. But however, not if you are carrying with a permit. So look, I don't want to get bogged down in those 3 specific states, but you should go research those state laws if that's where you're at. Now, what about states that do not require you to notify unless the officer asks you during the traffic stop? Here we would be looking at Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Kentucky, Minnesota, Missouri, New York, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, Washington, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. What if your state was not on that list? If you have a concealed carry license in a state that I didn't read to you on that, then you are not required to tell the officer that you have a gun in your vehicle when you get pulled over. Now, if you don't notify, what is the penalty you could be facing? Here's the crazy part. In many states, there's no penalty at all for failing to notify the officer, even in some must notify states. For example, in Texas, there is no actual criminal penalty for failing to notify the officer that you have a gun. The problem is you could end up losing your concealed carry license if you don't notify him. Now, not all states are created equal, because in some states like North Carolina, you could be facing jail time and misdemeanor charges and pretty significant criminal penalties if you fail to notify the officer because you're in a must notify state. So, how should I notify an officer I've got a gun in the car? This is where it gets a little tricky. Let's take a look at this gentleman who turns out to be a national firearms instructor and also has a concealed carry license. He gets pulled over, he has a gun strapped to his chest, and a police officer approaches him on a traffic stop. I'll tell you how he did.
Listen, I'm a supervisor for a transport company. Obviously, I'm armed. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
I just gave you my permit and everything. Tags are completely expired.
So, as you see, this man has a gun on his chest. The police officer walks up to the window, and before he even tells him why he pulls him over, we see this gentleman in the driver's seat interrupt him and tell him what? I know that my tags are already expired. So one of the first things we have to do is remember, keep our hands on the steering wheel. Don't volunteer any more information than is necessary during the traffic stop.
I know you got me, man. This car not even supposed to be on the street. I was driving. They was going to come tow it. I'm transporting everything out of here to my other vehicle. I'm just trying to just drive it.
So notice the next mistake that he makes. Instead of letting the officer ask the question when he's saying, hey man, why you got all these guns in your car? He interrupts the officer and starts saying things like, I know you got me, man. So understand, everything you say can and will be used against you. And here he made the mistake of just not staying quiet. He could have kept his mouth closed, let the officer ask him the questions, exercise his constitutional rights.
I mean, do me a favor, keep your hands on the steering wheel. You're going to get your rifle back. I'm going to take the rifle just to make sure it's safe, put it out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, man, I'm going to reach in out and lock your door for my partner.
That's fine.
Now notice, even though he told him he had a concealed carry license and a national firearms instructor, the officer is still concerned about his safety. So now he's told him to keep his hands on the steering wheel and make sure that he didn't move because he was going to reach in to unlock the door and open the door and get him out. Why? Because the officer was going to make sure, for officer safety's sake, that he didn't have anything else on his person and that he wanted to check him out before he let him go.
All right, so we're going to secure the first one first, all right?
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to secure it.
So notice what he did right here. Number one, he followed exactly what the officer told him to do. He got out of the car, he put his hands above his head. He didn't grab to secure his weapon to the officer. The officer took it from him. He wanted to make sure that officer safety was taken care of, but notice the driver of this car, he was very careful about what he did and he did not resist the officer at all. And if you're like this guy and you're like me, you don't like the government snooping in to your stuff. And one area big government really likes to go after people on is their digital data, which is why I use NordVPN as the ultimate solution for my digital security and privacy. With NordVPN, your internet traffic is encrypted, ensuring that your data remains private from the hackers and the snoops that are out there. That way, whether you're on public Wi-Fi or you're browsing at home, you know that you're protected. And here's the best part, NordVPN is super easy to use. With the click of a button, you can connect to the fastest servers available, so that way you get lightning fast internet speed without sacrificing your security. And as a bonus, with thousands of servers in over 60 countries, NordVPN allows you to access your favorite content from anywhere in the world. So if you want peace of mind while surfing the web, NordVPN is actually offering a special discount to our viewers. Click down into the description and click the link and get your special offer today. So if you are in a must notify state and a police officer pulls you over, the smart thing to do is take your driver's license along with a copy of your concealed permit license and hand that to the officer at the same time, and then very calmly let the officer know that you have a weapon in the vehicle. Now, I don't advise that you just say, "Officer, I've got a gun." I wouldn't say that. That could get extremely dangerous. In fact, you should always calmly tell the officer you have a gun in the car, tell him where it is being stored, but the entire time, always keep your hands both firmly on the steering wheel. I have seen police officers respond in two very different ways in this situation. One, he thanks you for disclosing to him that you had the weapon. He tells you to keep it holstered. He writes your ticket and he lets you go on your way. Or you could end up having an officer that start getting really nervous, and now, especially if it's a rookie cop, he could start grabbing towards his gun and he could start to kind of tense up the conversation and start demanding more from you. If he starts to get confrontational with you, make sure you always move slowly. Do not make any quick movements in a situation like this. Now listen, some officers are going to then ask to be able to obtain possession of your weapon until the end of the traffic stop. This is where I've seen so many people go wrong. They start arguing with the cops. They start saying, "Hey man, don't you understand I got a concealed carry license? I'm a law-abiding citizen and I've done nothing wrong." Problem is, it's going to escalate the situation, and now what's going to happen is that officer is going to end up forcing you out of the car, and if you continue to meet or match aggression with more aggression, that officer is going to arrest you for a resisting arrest or disorderly conduct or anything else. Always remember the main goal in this situation. You're a concealed carry permit holder. Follow the law when it comes to revealing this to him. Let him write you the ticket, remain calm and collected, and be on your way so that you can get out of here safely. Now, what if the officer asks you to hand him your gun? Whatever you do, never do this. I would hope an officer would never ask you to do this, but I've seen some rookie cops and some officers that are not paying attention to what they're doing ask the individual in the vehicle to hand them the gun. And I'm just going to tell you right now, remember the rule I said earlier? Always keep your hands on the steering wheel. The moment you grab that gun, you are now in a position where you've given justification to that officer to claim that his safety is at risk. And this situation can get very deadly and very dangerous very quickly. My point here, never grab for your gun. Instead, only tell the officer while your hands are firmly on the steering wheel, tell the officer where the gun is located in the vehicle. And then you can give him consent to grab for the gun, but you do not give him consent to search the rest of the vehicle. This is really important. You're not giving him consent to search your whole car because you don't want him to get you out of the vehicle and now he's ransacking your entire vehicle during this experience. You don't want that. So as a result, you can give him the consent to grab the gun, but not have the consent to search your vehicle. Now, what if you have a concealed carry license in a state that is not a must notify, but instead only notify when asked? Should you voluntarily notify the officer you have a gun in your car if you're in a only notify when asked type state? My opinion is no. Why do I say that? Because the officer would need probable cause in order to search your car or to hold you up any longer. And the moment you volunteer that you have a gun in your vehicle, you are essentially making certain that they're going to hold up the encounter, and now you're going to be on the side of the road and you're introducing a much more tense situation that was unnecessary. Otherwise, it's just yes, sir, no, sir, thank you, sir, be on your way. Do not do or volunteer any other information so that you can be on your way and safe from the traffic stop. What if you are a passenger in a car and you have a concealed carry license? Do you still have to disclose to the officer that you have a gun? Here's the problem. In many states, this is a gray area in the law. And in fact, if you do the research, you'll find that many states will say that even as a passenger, if you get pulled over in a car, you now have been stopped. And as a result, if you're in a must-inform state, if you have a duty to disclose, now you are still required to tell that officer you have a weapon because you have a concealed carry license. What if you're a passenger and you're in a disclose only upon request state? Well, here's where you have to also be careful. I've seen people just decide they're not going to tell the officer that they have the weapon. And then what happens is the officer finds out you have the gun anyway. And then they end up being charged with a separate crime for lying to the police officer. So be aware of what those risks are. If you're in a duty to disclose state, it may be a situation where even as a passenger, you really need to go ahead and tell the officer. Now, where can all of this go sideways as a concealed carry permit holder? Let's say you're out with your spouse. Maybe you're at a restaurant, you've had a few drinks, and as you finish up your dinner, you decide to get back in the car and you start to pull out of the restaurant, and a police officer is patrolling that restaurant, and he goes ahead and finds some ticky-tack traffic violation to pull you over for, and then he gets a little closer to you and he smells the odor of alcohol on your breath. Here's what's going to happen. He's likely going to arrest you for DWI, but you're going to end up not with just one charge, but now you'll end up with 2 charges. Driving while intoxicated, and unlawful carrying of a weapon. What if you have a passenger in the car that's drunk? Or maybe you're the passenger and the driver is drunk. And now there's a search of the car and maybe there are some drugs found. In this situation, you could also end up being charged with unlawful carrying of a weapon. Why? In many states, including Texas, if you are arrested for another crime like DWI or possession of drugs of any sort, you will also end up being charged with unlawful carrying of a weapon because it is a crime as a concealed carry permit holder to also have your gun and either be intoxicated or be in possession of drugs. Unfortunately, I see this happen all the time. But what if you don't have a concealed carry license at all? If the officer comes to your window, knocks on the door and says, "I need your guns," do you have to tell him you have a gun, and do you have to give it to him? First of all, you absolutely do not have to disclose that you have a gun. There is something known as the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. And in fact, the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution provides that we are to be free from unreasonable search and seizures from the police. The only thing you are required to provide to this police officer when he walks up to your window and knocks on it, you do have to hand him your driver's license, your proof of insurance, and you have to have valid registration. Otherwise, you have a Fifth Amendment right not to answer any of those questions. You can absolutely refuse to answer those questions, and you have a Fourth Amendment right that you can refuse any search of your vehicle. and it will now put the pressure back on this police officer to establish that he has probable cause that a crime is or has been committed in order for him to be able to do a search of your vehicle. So remember, after you refuse consent to search, always keep your hands on the steering wheel. Be calm. Don't make any quick movements. Don't jerk or look around. That's when he'll start claiming his officer's safety is at risk. And now that could be used as a pretext to search your vehicle. Now, I've covered this a few times on some of my other videos, but the moment you refuse to give him consent to search your car, and the moment you exercise your right to remain silent, his tone might change with you a little bit. He might start saying some things like, hey man, if you're innocent, what do you have to hide? Why wouldn't you allow me to search your car for a minute? Oh, so now you're not going to answer my questions? Is that how this is going to go? Or he might say, look, man, if you don't agree to let me search your car, I'm going to go get a drug dog and they'll come out here and they're going to go ahead and alert around your car. Or I'm going to go get a warrant if you don't agree to cooperate. I want you to understand, when an officer starts saying things like, hey man, innocent people have nothing to hide, these are techniques that officers are trained to use in order to get you to cooperate. You should never feel bad for exercising your constitutional right to refuse consent to a search and to exercise your right to remain silent. In fact, that's what constitutional rights are for. They exist in order to protect us from bad police officers or people who might be either misinterpreting what you would say or to manipulate what you would say. So, constitutional rights are there to protect you as a citizen of our country. The problem is they don't protect you if you don't stand upon them and exercise those constitutional rights. Remember this, refusing to consent to a search can never be used against you in court. Also, refusing to answer any questions and remaining silent, as is your constitutional right, can also never be used against you in court. However, it's the things that you do say that will be used against you. Even the innocent things that you say can be twisted and turned or misinterpreted. So very rarely can you talk yourself out of a traffic stop or out of an arrest if a police officer is digging or fishing for more information. Finally, after you've refused consent to search and you've remained silent, it puts the ball back into the police officer's court. Now he's in a position where he's really going to have to make a decision to go ahead and write you that speeding ticket or traffic ticket and let you go on your way, or if he holds you any amount of time beyond the reasonable time to complete that traffic stop, then now it will be an illegal detention. So I want you to understand, under Supreme Court standard and precedent, the officer can only hold you as long as is reasonably necessary in order to complete that traffic violation. So if it's a speeding ticket, he can only hold you as long as is necessary to write the ticket and get you on your way. At this point, you can always ask the officer, "Officer, am I free to leave?" If he says, yes, you're free to leave, politely start the car and drive away, and now the encounter is over. If he tells you no, that you are not free to leave, then once again, re-urge your constitutional rights. Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle, and I exercise my right to remain silent. And then at that point, you are putting the burden back on the officer to be able to prove that he had a reasonable basis to hold you beyond the time it took to write you that traffic ticket. In fact, if the officer continues to pursue holding you on the side of the road and then maybe even performs a search of your vehicle, now your attorney can file a motion to suppress. They can go straight into the courtroom, potentially as a Fourth Amendment violation, get the entire case thrown out in court because the officer violated your constitutional rights. So remember, the officer must establish probable cause that a crime has been committed in order to do a legal search of your vehicle. That's only going to be able to be proven if he can either show a crime has been committed in plain view, like drugs sitting on the chair next to you, or if he is able to establish probable cause that a crime has taken place based upon your behavior or something that you say that comes out of your mouth. Otherwise, if you choose not to consent, if you refuse consent to search your vehicle, the officer is not going to be able to legally do anything regarding a gun that you have in your vehicle. Remember, the Fourth Amendment will protect you in this situation, but only if you exercise your constitutional rights to remain silent and refuse consent to search. Now, what happens if a police officer comes to your front door and starts demanding your guns? Check out this next video where I walk you through the 5 tips you need to know if an officer demands your guns at your front door. I'll see you over there.